Liberty, equality, fraternity. These are ideas we kind of take for granted today, right? But they were forged in the fire of one of the most explosive, most important events in all of world history. So let's get right into it, the French Revolution. We're going to break down how an entire society got turned completely upside down. Okay, so picture this. It's the morning of July 14th, 1789. The air in Paris is electric, with fear and anger. The king has surrounded the city with troops, and rumors are flying. They're about to open fire on the citizens. So thousands of people, ordinary men and women, spill out onto the streets, desperate to find weapons, ready for a fight. And they all have one target in mind, the Bastille, a grim medieval fortress and prison that for them was the ultimate symbol of the king's tyrannical power. You see, the storming of the Bastille wasn't just some random riot. It was the spark that lit the fuse of a revolution. But it didn't just happen out of the blue. So the big question is, how did things get so bad that regular people were willing to attack a military fortress? And why did this one day change everything? Let's figure it out. To really get why something explodes, you have to look at the ingredients first, right? Well, 18th century France was basically a giant powder keg, just stuffed with social inequality, economic misery, and radical new ideas. And it was just waiting for a spark. So, this is what French society looked like before 1789. Historians call it the old regime. And it was, for all intents and purposes, a feudal system. It was fundamentally unfair, splitting everyone up into 3 groups or estates. At the very top, you had your clergy and nobility, the privileged few. And at the bottom, well, you had literally everyone else. Now, this is where it gets really wild. Just look at these numbers. The first and second estates, the clergy and nobles, they made up a tiny 3% of the population, but owned about 35% of all the land. And check out that last row. Taxes paid? A big fat no. The entire financial weight of the country, the army, the government, the king's lavish court, it all rested on the shoulders of the third estate, all 97% of them. And people felt this injustice, This wasn't some abstract concept. This popular etching from the time says it all. It shows the nobleman as a spider, getting fat, while the peasant is caught in his web, like a fly, forced to give up everything he has. It's such a potent image of exploitation, of a system where a tiny, privileged group just lives off the hard work of everybody else. Okay, so you have this incredibly unfair social pyramid. Now, let's add 2 more ingredients to the mix that push this whole system to its breaking point. A government that was completely broke and a population that was starving. By the time Louis XVI came to power in 1774, France was, to put it mildly, flat broke. You had decades of expensive wars, including helping the American colonies break away from Britain, plus the insane spending of the real court at Versailles. All of it had just drained the treasury dry. The government was more than 3 billion livres in debt and had to spend more and more of its budget just paying off the interest. And as if a financial crisis wasn't enough, there was a massive population boom. Over about 70 years, France's population shot up by 5 million people. More people means more mouths to feed, which means a huge jump in the demand for food, especially bread, which was what everyone ate. Problem was, food production just couldn't keep up. This all led to what historians call a substance crisis, and it was a horrible, vicious cycle. It would start with a bad harvest, maybe a drought. That means less grain. With demand high and supply low, the price of bread would just skyrocket. But nobody's wages were going up, so the poorest people simply couldn't afford to buy food anymore. This led to starvation, disease, and, you guessed it, food riots. And this wasn't a one-time thing. It happened over and over again. So we've got an unjust society and a nation literally struggling to survive. The powder keg is packed to the brim. But what was it that finally lit the fuse? It wasn't just hunger. It was a revolution in the way people were thinking. The ideas of the Enlightenment were spreading like wildfire, and they gave people a whole new vocabulary to talk about what was wrong. You had thinkers like Locke, Rousseau, and Montesquieu questioning everything about the old regime. They argued that governments weren't chosen by God. They should be an agreement, a social contract between the people and their rulers. This completely changed how people saw the world. For the first time, the Third Estate could actually imagine a different kind of society, one based on liberty and equality, not privilege. And they could just look across the ocean and see that it wasn't just a dream. The American Revolution proved it could actually happen. The tension was so thick, You could cut it with a knife. This quote, and wow, is it a chilling one, is from an English traveler, Arthur Young. He was in France just 2 years before the revolution, and he could see the writing on the wall. He understood that a system built on this much inequality and oppression was just bound to end in violence. So how did all of this, the injustice, the debt, the new ideas, finally explode? Let's zoom in on that pivotal year, 1789, and watch the sparks fly. The speed of what happened in 1789 is just breathtaking. It kicks off on May 5th, when the king, desperate for money, calls a meeting of the estates general. Big mistake. The Third Estate basically hijacks the whole thing. By June 20th, they find themselves locked out of their meeting hall, so they just move to a nearby tennis court and swear an oath not to quit until France has a constitution. They call themselves the National Assembly, the real representatives of the nation. Then, boom, July 14th, the people of Paris storm the Bastille. And then, on the night of August 4th, in one unbelievable session, the Assembly abolishes the entire feudal system. Centuries of privileges, gone. Just like that, in a single night. So, in just a matter of weeks, the entire power structure had shifted. The absolute monarchy was falling apart, and something totally new was being built to replace it. And here's the bottom line, the fundamental change. On the left, you've got the old system, that rigid pyramid with the king on top. On the right, you have the new system laid out in the 1791 Constitution. Now, it's not a full democracy, not yet, but power is now split between the king, an elected assembly, and the courts. But, and this is a huge but, notice that the right to vote was only for so-called active citizens, basically men who owned property. This little detail is going to become a major source of conflict on the road. But for now, France was a constitutional monarchy. And maybe the most important, most lasting thing to come out of this first phase of the revolution is this document right here, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. It spelled out the core beliefs of the revolution, and its ideas would go on to inspire freedom movements all over the world. I mean, just listen to these principles. Men are born and remain free and equal in rights. That things like liberty are natural and inalienable. That all power comes from the people, the nation, not from some king. And that everyone is equal before the law. Today, this might sound familiar, but back then, this was absolutely earth-shattering, a complete and total rejection of the old regime. But, of course, the story doesn't end there. Not everyone was sold on the new system. The radical journalist Jean-Paul Marat, for one, argued that by only giving property owners the right to vote, the new constitution was still stacked in favor of the rich. He was basically saying, hey, we got rid of the nobles, but did we just replace them with a new boss, the wealthy? He saw a new fight on the horizon. And that really brings us to the final lingering question. The revolution had definitely shattered the old world. It created a new France, one built on this amazing promise of liberty and equality. But as Marat's words hint, what that equality actually meant was still very much up for grabs. Was this a revolution for all French citizens, or just the ones with money? The fight to answer that question would plunge France into the next, even more radical and bloodier phase of the revolution.